The East Coast states and the Commonwealth have been brawling over the meagre water in the Murray-Darling Basin pretty much since Federation. The guide to the last plan was hailed by conservationists but burned by irate farmers. The latest incarnation proposes a smaller cut in water allocations phased in over 7 years. But as political editor Chris Uhlmann reports, that's still too much for some farmers and nowhere near enough for environmentalists.
In Australia, water has always been boom or bust. And that's fertile ground for a fight.
Governments couldn't give a shit about what happens to us people here.
Burn the plan! Burn the plan!
A year ago, a guide to how water might be managed in the Murray-Darling Basin in future was greeted with outrage by river communities.
Get out of here and leave us alone!
The man charged with crafting the plan said the river needed 3,000 to 4,000 more gigalitres of water a year to ensure a healthy environment. That's about 6 to 8 times the volume of Sydney Harbour.
Social and economic impacts are going to be very significant already at the 3,000 level. We think that they are just beyond management at 4,000 plus. So we've not chosen to go beyond that in the proposals we put forward.
The Murray-Darling Basin stretches from Queensland to South Australia, grows more than 1/3 of the nation's food and includes 77,000 kilometres of rivers and more than 25,000 wetlands. The Constitution gives states control of the rivers, and over 110 years they over-allocated rural water entitlements. For 2 decades the states attempted to coordinate water use, but 7 years of drought drove John Howard to try and forge a single basin plan.
The current trajectory of water use and management in Australia is not sustainable. In a protracted drought and with the prospect of long-term climate change, we need radical and permanent change.
The Murray-Darling Basin Authority was given the task of balancing the economic, social and environmental water demands. But when its first guide emerged, the furious reaction of farmers pushed the government to launch 2 inquiries and eventually led to the resignation of its chair. A former politician replaced the bureaucrat, and today he produced a new plan.
So we've endeavoured to strike a balance with this draft plan that's now a proposition out for public exhibition for the next 20 weeks. We believe the plan achieves a range of environmental objectives within the constraints of the system. We are unashamedly making the point that we do not seek to go back to natural pre-European settlement models of managing the system. There are things in the system like dams and roads and bridges and indeed towns on floodplains that exist for good reason. They contribute to our wealth, our national circumstance, our standard of living.
The original call was for 3,000 to 4,000 gigalitres of water to be returned to the environment each year. That's been reduced to 2,750 gigalitres. The plan says about 1,300 gigalitres a year has already been found through buybacks and infrastructure improvements. So cuts of about 1,500 gigalitres a year still have to be found by 2019. Environmental groups are dismayed.
This basin plan fails regional communities, the river and the national interest. What we need is a river system that flushes 2 million tonnes of salt from the mouth, that flows and is alive.
It's quite clear that we need to be doing far more than what this plan, as released today, is going to deliver.
Even under this plan, some towns in the basin will face significant adjustment. They include the cotton-growing areas of the Lower Balonne, smaller towns in the New South Wales Murray, which will be hit by cuts to rice growing, the central and western parts of the Murrumbidgee region, which rely on irrigated horticulture and rice, smaller dairying communities in the Golden Broken and Victorian Murray catchments, and horticulture communities in the Victorian Murray and South Australian Riverland.
In terms of the environmental water needed, I think, we all know this is not an exact science area. So let's put in place a lower amount to start with start to understand what effect that's having, and not just on the environment, but on people and communities.
We've had every group out here today, and the one thing I think they all have in common is none of them are happy. And they're not happy because they're equally unhappy. They're not happy because there's no detail.
I've set down minimum expectations that I believe we need to meet to make the reform meaningful. One of those is for the mouth of the Murray in South Australia to be open 9 years out of 10. There's other minimum expectations for different wetlands that are throughout the basin. Without exception, every one of those minimum standards has been met, and met in a way that gives communities time to adjust through a gradual transition.
When you look at the accounting for this, though, you say that you only need now to find 1,500 gigalitres a year because you've already found some before. Was that the case last time round?
It was the case last time round. Unfortunately, the presentation that happened when the guide was released, which was fair to say not the ideal way for things to be presented, implied a few things. It implied that there would be forced acquisition. It implied that there'd be no account taken of the effort made so far. And those issues have all been given a lot more clarity today, that if people don't want to sell their water, we don't want to buy it. There'll be no compulsory acquisition. And we do take account of the water recovery so far. For the numbers that have been announced today, more than 45% of that work is already done. And between now and 2019, we have an opportunity through a staged, gradual way to do the rest.
Now, we saw really angry reactions from some of the rural communities last time. You're visiting some of them, I understand.
That's right. Tomorrow I'll be in Shepparton for a meeting, and after that in Griffith. Originally I'd accepted quite a public meeting in Griffith, and they've now changed the date since then. But I'll still be in Griffith tomorrow. I understand that Barnaby Joyce and Fiona Nash and others will be in Griffith at the same time. The day after that, I'll be in South Australia. I hope that they go there as well. For too long, the National Party spokespeople have gone through the irrigation communities and have given one message there, while local South Australian MPs have given a different message in Adelaide. I think it's about time that if Barnaby Joyce wants to be in Griffith the same time I'm there, that he also comes to Adelaide the same time I'm there as well, and delivers a consistent message instead of the game playing up and down the basin that they've been doing for too long.
Clearly, one of the aims of this process was to reduce the political heat, but the states don't like what they see and they can scuttle the plan. South Australia is thinking about a High Court challenge.
There is a headline number of 2,750 gigalitres as a water recovery target, and at first blush that doesn't appear to be an adequate amount of water to restore the river to health.
There are 20 weeks for comment before a final plan's settled, and either House of Parliament could strike it down. So the water fight that's raged since Federation is a long way from settled.
Political editor Chris York.